We all know how easy it is to continually generate great content for our sites. It's easy. We all know how to do it. So why are we going to have this session? Really, we all know that it's not true that it's easy to create good content, and we need some help. Mark Tilley is the CEO of Target Info, the developer of the My Curator WordPress plugin. The good thing with content creation, which Mark is going to talk about, is that it's easy to do, and Google loves excellently curated content. This session is How Content Curation Makes You a Better Writer. Please welcome Mark Tilley.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello? All right, we're set. I'm going to be down here because I've got examples from a lot of clients of different type of curated material. But thank you all for coming. This is great. I'm really looking forward to this. How many of you have heard of content curation? All right, that's pretty good. Yeah, content curation is sort of a hot topic these days. On my Hootsuite account, I follow content curation and some hashtags. I get 30 plus or more every day. So it's pretty busy. What they're promising are things like more engagement with your clients, more content, as Andrew said. Maybe it's a lot easier. I'm not sure about that. Build your SEO. And you know, it's sort of a fad these days. And when you get a fad type of going, one of the things is you'll start seeing a lot of posts like content curation could maybe make you wealthy, maybe it'll improve your sex life, maybe it'll improve your health, your wealth. I'm going to talk about how it's going to make you a better writer. So I'm jumping on the bandwagon. Maybe I'm one of the first. So we'll get started with that. Content curation, I think I'm going to go over a couple things. I want to go over sort of where content curation came from and what it looks like today at a high level. And then how do you actually go about doing it? You know, what is the actual physical, you know, day-to-day stuff of content curation? And I think after that you'll have a good sense of, you know, what it is, what you can do with it, if it's right for you, because not everyone's going to be a curator. I think content curation came from a couple different things. There's a couple different trends going on. The first is what I call content famine. How many of you have seen websites where the Hello World post is still #1 or 2? I mean, you know, maybe a little extreme, but this happens all the time. I would say a huge amount of the people that sign up for My Curator, I go look at their site, it looks like this. The other one is, how many businesses have you gone to and seen that their only blog post is welcome? You know, same sort of thing. It's really, really hard to write content. How many of you have had a day where you couldn't get some content out? You know, maybe once or twice at best. It's hard to do. Content is really, you know, it's hard to sit down and be a writer. I've been in business doing software, building companies for years. I wrote memos, I wrote emails, I wrote consulting proposals. When I started my own website and company with My Curator and had to start writing blog posts, that was the hardest thing I'd ever done. It's really hard. The other big trend I find in content curation is information overload. So that's a little bit of a paradox. It's so hard to write content, but we're overloaded with content. I mean, this is a slide that's overloaded. Content is everywhere. You go on Twitter, and it comes blasting at you. You go on Facebook, your friends are recommending articles all day. So information overload, as the famous quote from Clay Shirky said, is really not information overload, it's filter failure. It's how do you weed through it? And I would say that, you know, what content curation does is try and sort of, you know, pull together this paradox. I need content for my site, yet there's tons of content out there. You know, how do I fix that paradox? And that's where content curation comes in. That didn't seem to work. There we go. So let's look at the types of content curation. Curation started obviously in the physical world. People have been curating stuff for ages. I mean, museums and libraries, art collections and galleries. You know, in the physical world, curation's been around a long time. On the web, I would say some of the early ones in the early part of the web were Yahoo and AOL. Remember back in those days, you went to AOL because it was impossible to find stuff on the web, but AOL had it all right there in little blocks. And Yahoo did the same thing. They had all sorts of pages for you. Those guys got sort of superseded by search, by Google. You know, instead of going to a site to find stuff, you search for it. So I would go out and search for stuff. Well, what happened with information overload is Google got overloaded. Right now I go and search. Let's say I go to content curation and look for, you know, some articles. Well, I'll get pages and pages of relevant articles. Now I got to read through all that. If I look on Twitter for content curation, I'm going to see tweets every 5 minutes about it. So I'm getting overloaded. What happens is, one of the first ways of doing curation was to pull together stuff in niches. So curation is aggregation. Huffington Post was a good example early on. They decided to go out, instead of reading your local paper or going to the New York Times, the Huffington Post grabbed articles and put them in one spot. So if you wanted to read about business news or entertainment, you went there. TechMeme started purely as an automated aggregation site. They had bots that went out and scraped the web for anything technological, posted it on a single site. So with TechMeme, you could go right there and find your information about technology. Those guys, though, have grown on way beyond that. You know, curation as aggregation, I think, is really dying now because, you know, both Huffington Post and TechMeme are full of editors and writers and curators. They're starting to look like media again. You know, they've moved away from the aggregation, and they're, you know, going and starting to write articles, put in their points of view, etc. So I think curation as aggregation is not a way you can really go anymore. The only examples I've seen that are really working pretty well are things like business to business. Let's say you're doing industrial valves for water treatment plants. Well, there's not a lot of news about that. You might as well go scrape everything you can find and put it on your site. Your customers will probably find it somewhat helpful. It'll probably add value. And they don't have time to go and look for industrial valve articles. So you're adding some value to your customers as a curator. And all you're doing is just finding all the articles. Another example would be a blog where you have a really tight niche, so like cooking with Stone Age tools. You know, there's not a lot of articles about it. But the people that are into it, they're going to be into it. And if you have all the articles, that's a great place to go. People are going to come back to your blog. I've got a couple examples here on, you know, from our examples. I wanted to go to people, you know, real life examples out there. Here's a site that I think is a good aggregation site. It's all about supply chain for China. He also has a site in India and another one in Indonesia. So he's just aggregating information about supply chain. You know, if I'm going to build widget B and I need someone in China to make it and I need a bunch of parts from other places, this is a great place to go. I can go and find all the information. A nice targeted business-to-business magazine. Another example. There's another client of mine. I can't read this. It's all in Russian. But this person's basically curating Russian fashion in Russia, finding, you know, I think it's obviously Russian fashion. I ran it through Google Translate once, and that's what she was doing. So again, a niche site. You know, there's probably not a lot of people in Russia that are doing this, so it works for this site. And then finally, here's sort of the older style of aggregation. You know, everything about sports. So, you know, you'll see a lot of my examples have this sort of Pinterest theme, which is very popular. But every article you can think of about sports, the only thing I could see that's a little different about this site than, you know, any other big aggregation site is they seem to find sort of weird offbeat articles. So, you know, maybe that's a niche. Maybe this person, people come to this site because it has things that you aren't going to find on Huffington Post or, you know, some of the other big sports sites, ESPN or something like that. So those are all examples of curation as aggregation. I think the next level, though, and this is where most people get to if you're really going to do curation, is curation as filter. Remember that quote? Curation as filter means I'm not going and finding every article about sports. I have an angle. In this case, here's a client of ours, Doug Woods. He's got a collection of posts about education technology in England. And I've looked through his blog. You know, there's probably 50 or 100 posts written about education technology these days, every day. You know, it's a hot topic. But he's whittled it down. He goes through and he finds the ones that he thinks his audience will like the best. And he's not doing much more than those other aggregation sites. He's just grabbing the post, taking an excerpt, and a read more link back to the original. But for his blog, if I'm thinking of using him as a consultant and I come to his blog, I say, hey, you know, here's some interesting articles. Maybe I'll come back and check it out periodically. You know, as the previous speaker was saying, you know, what content curation is about is not trying to sell a person who's looking to buy today. It's trying to handle those other 67%. It's people that are just browsing around, thinking about stuff. So I come to this site periodically, and then all of a sudden my school board says, you know, we want to do some education technology initiative. Who should we hire? Oh, you know, I've been reading this guy Doug Wood's page. You know, why don't we talk to him? So curation, I think, is not a, you know, sales tool today. It's more of a longer term, you know, a way to connect with your audience. And by the way, it fills up your blog. You know, if you see this, you've got interesting articles. You didn't have to write anything yet. We'll get to that later. I've got some examples here. Here's one of my favorites. This is St. Louis Carpenter. So I go to this site. I get let's say I get 3 bids of carpenters. And I go to their website. One of them has the Hello World post. The other one has the Welcome to My Carpenter post, and that's it. And I go to this person, and he's got a whole series of posts. You know, curated articles, but they're about, you know, carpenters, people doing work in the area, types of home improvement jobs. You know, nothing special. I don't think he spent a lot of time on it. Every article has a title, a nice little excerpt, and a link back to the original. So I'm sitting there looking at this and saying, hey, this could be an interesting, you know, interesting carpenter. You know, he seems to be on the ball. He's going out and finding stuff and keeping abreast. Of course, he may be a horrible carpenter. I don't know, but his website looks great. Another example with a little more curated filter. The EU has a program called Media Freedom and Plurality. You know, the EU has, I don't know how many bureaucracies, so they've set one up that just follows these trends, and they have a few academics who curate articles. They don't pick everything. They pick very specific articles, they post them, and they're meant to help you with the policy of the EU. So again, you know, a very good way of being the filter for curation. You know, if you're in the media in the EU and they're talking about some new law that's going to affect all the countries, you know, they're going to be looking at this stuff. Yeah? You're filtering. You're using your own expertise. You're saying, you know, because again, on media freedom and plurality, there's probably thousands of articles out there every week. Someone has to sit there and look at them and say, this looks good, this looks bad, I'm going to put this one up. Even the carpenter up there has to do that because there's a million articles about home improvement. And besides, if you're doing pure aggregation, your site just explodes with content, and Google usually these days doesn't like that. If you just have tons of content, it's a little too much. It says, wait a minute, this is just, something's going wrong here. Another example of sort of filtering, again, another Pinterest type theme. You know, it seems like more like aggregation. There's all these stories here about home tips. But if you look real close, every one of them is a tightly organized story about a specific tiny little project. You know, so like how to install, you know, herb gardens, how to build a handy greenhouse, how to propagate roses with cuttings. And each one, if you look at it, in this case, here's a person who's not just grabbing an article and putting on their blog. If you come down here, in this section here, they've written a nice little thing, you know, a little intro to this article, and below it is a nice video about how to do it. So basically what they do is they set up, they filter everything very tightly to things that they've got a real niche. They don't want how to redo your kitchen, how to add a garage, how to build a second story. They're doing tiny little projects, and they're doing them well. They put in a little they put in a little writing, and then they, have a video to help you do it, or maybe a set of steps or whatever. So that's curation as filter. I think that's where most people are right now. When you're doing curation as filter, what you're starting to do is building your own authority. When you do aggregation, it's not you, it just looks like a bunch of stuff. When you're filtering, it's your voice, your words. You're starting to build a point of view and a story on your blog or your site. You're making some engagement with your audience, you're generating some authority. And this is the type of stuff that Google likes, when it has sharply focused articles that match the rest of your blog, that attribute back to the original. I think the next level, though, and you're starting to see it in some places, and why I'm talking about this today, is curation as a way to create. And this goes, I think, the next level. Instead of just finding a bunch of articles, getting them on your site, using some filter, typing in some comments, you're actually starting to create articles. In this case, here's one of my favorite is Brain Picking's blog, Maria Popova. I don't know, have anyone ever seen her blog? You have, yep. She's known as one of the best curators in the business, frankly. What she does, she actually curates mainly from books. And she doesn't just do a book review. Here's the book, here's the plot, blah, blah. Here's an example. 4 different authors on the meaning of life. I mean, that's a broad topic. And she doesn't just talk about what they thought. She puts up their quotes. She does point-counterpoint. She wrestles with the questions. And at the end has a tremendous blog post. Maria Popova, I'm not sure how to spell, P-O-P-O-V-A. The site is Brain Pickings. And it's very literary, but and it's just her. She just comes up with this stuff by reading widely. And that's where I think you're going to see more and more curation go, is where you're actually not just grabbing articles, but you're starting to write a lot more about them. You're using it as a jumping off point. Yeah?
I have a question about referencing. I have sites that are e-commerce sites,
Yeah.
And some of the plugins I've used to create content and to get content for like articles on surfing or whatever, a lot of them require that you put a link. They all come out with links,
Yep.
out of the plugin automatically. And my understanding is a lot of those you can't. You're not allowed to use that content without referencing it, and then you lose clients through.
Yep.
You lose
Yeah.
customers through the click-through.
See, the second most question I get. I'm going to talk about it in a bit, but basically, you're right, you do lose clients, but the way you keep them is by doing something like this or filtering. You're building trust with your audience. So you're saying, you came to my site to find it. If you can go find this stuff, that's fine, but it's going to be easier to come to my site to find it. And that's how you get around that problem. Yeah. It's actually, she's doing mainly donation right now. She was generating revenue mainly by donation was the question. She is starting to branch out, I think, into some other areas, but I'm not really sure. Okay, so some fully curated sites. I'll just do one of them here. Here's what I love about curation. There's a site on all garage floors. Now, I could see garages, new garages, but just garage floors. That's pretty interesting. But if you come down here, this person curated an article, 5 things I wish I knew before epoxying my garage floor. And then he used it as a jumping off point to solve this person's problems. How should you have done it? What are those mistakes? What are some of the solutions? So here's an example of curation where you're actually creating something by watching the wider world in a very tight little niche. So now this person, I couldn't imagine building content every day for a site called All Garage Floors, but this person's using curation to get some ideas, to then write some interesting content about garage floors. So, here's your question. First question I always get, is content curation plagiarism? I'm going and grab content from other people. Isn't that stealing? Not if you follow the golden rule. As you mentioned, most curation tools have attribution links, and there's a reason. You want to say, it's not my content, it came from over here. Go read it. Similarly, down at the bottom, don't copy the full text. That just makes it look like you wrote it. Just grab an excerpt. And in fact, if you're filtering, you should be finding the best quotes out of that article. That's what you want to do to incite your audience to go look at it, to tell them that, hey, I added some value here that you're not going to find anywhere else. So you want to add the right quotes, and you make it your own with comments and opinions. So that is what happens. That's how you make that second question go away. Because there is no real answer for that. People do click on that link and go look at the other one, the other site. And in fact, you really want that to happen, because for that writer, you've broadened their distribution, because people that come to your blog or site probably don't go to theirs. You click through, maybe they get some of the ad revenue that they have, or maybe someone buys an ebook on their site. You know, great. That's sharing. Maybe what happens, though, is if you're a good curator and you've made it so that they can find information easy and find good information, that the person who went over there and bought that ebook says, you know, I'm going to go back to that original site because, you know, let's see what they have this week. It could be just as good. You know, so let's look at what we have next week. So you build trust. So the first thing is, don't plagiarize. Make sure you attribute. And second is, make sure you're a good enough curator that when people do leave your site, they've left with the knowledge of where they came from, and they're going to come back. And that's how you make curation work as a filter. Yeah?
Would it be okay to make that link when you send traffic to another site open in another window?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's okay. People do that a lot. You know, I think it depends on how you are. I really don't think it helps a lot, because they go to the window, and if they really like the other site, they probably won't come back today. But again, they may come back next week.
Mark, how do you feel about making that link an affiliate link?
Affiliate link is, I mean, if it's truly an affiliate, that's, you know, that's okay. If you're, if you're curating content from your own, where you're an affiliate, you know, I think over time, if that's all you're doing, you aren't going to be adding much value, because everyone's going to come to your site and say, all they have is links to people selling, you know, garage floors. So, you know, I think it'll work a little bit, but really curation is more about creating your own voice and your own authority. Mm-hmm.
I have a question about the key terms that when people log into your website homepage, is there certain terms, certain colors that will hold a potential customer at that site?
And you know, that I don't know really. I think maybe some of the other sessions about SEO and pages and themes would probably answer it better. My point is mainly about content.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So let's quickly go through how you actually do this. The first part of content curation is discovery. To do content curation well, it's not easy. You have to read a lot. How many people have used Google Reader, which is now going away? Anyone? I'm switching to Flipboard. Anyone have any others that they're using? Feedly, yeah, I've heard that. Pulse? Mm-hmm. NewsGator, yep. So what happens is, if you have a feed reader, you're pulling all of your blogs that you're reading to one spot. And that's how you discover content. You're reading through it every day. Google Alerts are another great one. Watching Twitter feeds, you know, is another great one. Here's my content curation on Hootsuite. You know, every little tweet there has an article that I can go check out. But to be a good curator, you got to read a lot. That's the first step. You got to read very widely. It's not easy. That's the hidden side of content curation. It may look like all you do is post some simple little thing, but you've got to find it. This is where I think tools come in the best. There's a 1,000 tools out there. Whatever tool you're looking for, you want to make sure that it makes discovery easier. And it does that. Like this is from Scoop It, which is a website for curation. You just click a button and they have suggested content right there based on your keywords. You click that little green button and they can post it to their site and you've curated an article to their site. So it's a great way to do curate, a tool that pulls all that discovery much like a reader but adds even more features. That's where content curation tools come in. Oop. That's not what I wanted. Here's one from my program. I wanted to point on the very right is a thing called class. The other thing that a curation tool should do is help you weed through content. You should be able to train it. For instance, Scoop It, as you scoop articles, it remembers what you liked, and it brings more of those type. And those that you never click on, it remembers that those are type you don't want to see. So just like a spam filter, to help you discover content, if you're going to be reading 50 to 100 posts a day, you need a spam filter, so you don't have to read through a bunch of junk. And most tools have that feature, whereas our tools, it will classify things as good or bad or not sure based on your training. You tell it, this was a good article, that's a bad one. So that's a key feature of discovery. That's where I think tools come in the most. They obviously aren't going to let you write. The next step in curation is sharing. You want to get it out to your social networks. If you find a post, you can just post it on Google Plus or Facebook. You could just tweet it. You don't need a tool for that. But we're at a WordPress camp. What you want to do is post an article in your blog. And this is what a typical 90% of the curated articles will look like. You have a title. You make sure you put a picture on there. You've got a little intro. Why did I find it? A quote in the block quotes. And at the bottom, your attribution. It's a pretty simple formula. Most of the work is in discovery. Once you've figured it out, that's not a hard post to write. So it's a great way to get started. Then you can use all sorts of WordPress plugins that'll automatically post that out to your social networks. Things like Jetpack has Publicize. There's social network auto posters. There's Twitter posters. There's tons of plugins that when you write a post, boom, it's out to your social networks. Once you get beyond those two stages, you start really curating, and your blog is going to look more like that one on the left where you've got written content about each article you found. If you look at the article, they do real good attribution here. Content Marketing Institute, they highlight where did this come from. They actually have a link right to the main blog. In the second paragraph, they talk about the author. And in the third paragraph, they say why I have this is, well, here's the 2 key points from this article and the link. Great curation. So to really be doing curation, I got to speed up because of time. Really do well in curation, you have to make it a regular practice. And that's really where the hard part comes in. You have to be reading every day. You have to look at all of those articles and say, why would I want to post this? What is it going to add to my audience? You have to learn to become a good curator with a good eye. And there's a lot of ways to do it. There's a lot of ways to sort of add some variability to your curations. For instance, you could build a story after several posts. Each one's a little change. They ask questions, so I get 5 more. You could highlight the unique, sort of like funniest videos. Do that with your curation. Point, counterpoint. Here's one article I found, here's another. They have opposing views. Let me be the moderator, or let them go at it. What to read this week is a great sort of wrap-up, and it's also great for your emails. Here's 5 posts. I've been reading 100 articles a day. Here's the 5 best. Here's why. Post it on your blog. Send it out on your email newsletter. Great way of curation. So my final slide is we got to get back to where I started. Curation as a self-study course in writing. If you think about it, what I just went through is exactly that. And this is how I came upon it myself. First of all, disciplined regular discovery of articles, authors, and writing examples. If you're reading 50 blog posts or 100 blog posts a week, you're getting a good view of what's happening out there in the world in your niche. You're seeing well-written posts, horrible posts. You're starting to learn. You're starting to learn what good writing looks like. Next step, you start with reactions to these things. Just like I'm sure you remember in college or high school, your teacher says, read this handout and give me a reaction, one-page reaction. Or read this chapter in a novel and give us a 2-paragraph reaction. That's writing 101. And that's what you're doing in curation. You're reacting to stuff you find and writing about it. So those simple little comments become practice in writing. Then you start expanding to longer comments. To give you an example, for me, I started with typical aggregation. I just posted things. That moved my my welcome post down a couple pages. Then I started writing a few reactions to it, and I started filtering. That moved things down a couple more pages. This is now 2 or 3 months. Then I started writing longer comments about things. And eventually, I even got to the point where I wrote an article. It took me 6 months. Most of you, hopefully, maybe it'll take a week or two, but I'm slow. So anyway, you're starting to write. You're doing it in a regular, disciplined way, and you're getting feedback from your community. Because when you post on the blog, some articles get a lot of shares, some don't. Some get retweeted, some don't. Some get picked up by other curators, some don't. Why? That's how you start learning about your own writing, what makes sense for your community. Some show up at the top of Google's search page, some don't. What happened? Why? Getting tremendous feedback just from the web. You don't have to have your English teacher sitting over your back. So finally, I think most people aren't going to become great curators. They aren't going to have the eye to be able to pick out the best things and wow their audience daily. But I think what people can become is learning how to write better. You get a constant source of inspiration coming from all those articles. You get a constant source of motivation from reading them. And then you get a bunch of different ways of creating posts. Like I mentioned before, point, counterpoint. There's a whole bunch of ways of writing now rather than just sitting down with a blank page. So that's why I think curation could make you a better writer. And that's about it. Questions?
We have about 5 minutes more for questions.
I'm going to use here. Where are you? One of my clients came to me last week. She's doing a baby planner website, yourbabyplanner.com, and she started curating content. She was asking me all kinds of questions, and I'm like, I don't know anything about content curating. And her questions to me were, if affiliate links are pulled in or Google ads are pulled in, is there any way she can override those with the plugin, like maybe using skim links or something, so those are redirected to her affiliates rather than using that's pulled in?
Yep. It depends. If she's using a tool to pull it in, then you're right. You'd probably have to use some sort of plug-in to then clean it up. But my point would be what you should do is read the articles first before you post them, and then selectively
Manually.
cut and paste the quotes you want. And that way you can then just say, okay, kill this link or change this link.
Yeah,
that's the
hers
key.
is mostly just turn on, let it drip.
Yeah.
Not a lot of work on it.
Yeah, and even just reading through them and then picking out, instead of just letting it run automatically, I would counsel to just take 5 minutes a day and look through it real quick and find 2 that you want to post today. Or maybe you just set a schedule. I'm going to do 3 a week. I'm going to see all this content, but I'm only going to post 3. And that way, you're using some filter, you're gaining an eye, and then you also have a little bit of time to say, okay, what do I want to post about it and what do I want to say about it? And I think that builds better curation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you were talking earlier about discovery and feed readers, things like Flipboard, Pulse, Scoop It. Like I write blog posts for different things, like one's a lawyer. So I've always just done like a search and had to read through a ton of things. So what would you think is one of the best feed reader type of things out there that can be used that keeps you with something up to date? Because that's one of the things I find worse is something old, and then I'm writing this article and I'm trying to grab one more source, find it, and realize that I have to restart my whole entire thing because I had something that was old the first time.
Yep. Most of the feed readers like Feedly and Flipboard, they tell you, Feedly, I'm pretty sure, I haven't used it in a while, tells you these are the newest articles that came in since the last ones you read. Flipboard puts the newest ones up front, and they're fairly, they refresh themselves. When you open it up, it goes out and finds anything new and pulls it from the feeds. So it should keep you. Feedly, F-E-E-D-L-Y. And that's probably, Flipboard doesn't tell you what you've read in a sense, whereas Feedly does, so it's a better way to keep track of things.
Mark, I'm going to take the last question for me.
Okay.
Thank you. For people who write their own content, is there a good percentage of what percent should be brand new and what should be curated?
Yeah, there's nothing, there's no like A/B comparisons out there done with SEO or anything. I think it depends on your audience. I've heard everything from 30% curated to 30% your own content and 70% curated. I think it's, the point is it's probably a balance. If you're writing your own content and you're doing curation, you want a balance, and it depends probably on your audience.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Mark Tilley.
Thank you.